The political labels of today don't capture what's really going on, and almost everyone misses the truth. Because even though a new division is growing, what comes next is still up in the air, whether it's reform and rebirth or decadence and corruption. So if you like big conflicts, new leaders, or just a good story to tell, this video will have something for you. But before we begin, this is the third in a 3-part series, so watch the other 2 when you get the chance. But with that out of the way, let's explore what the future has in store for us. As with most realignments, this one starts with a restless group of voiceless voters, people who always participate yet can never seem to get what they want most. Following Reagan's landslide victory in 1980, his vision of a proactive America extending its economic and military influence to all nations had come to dominate the country's foreign policy. But victories for America often came at the expense of Americans. Trade deals sent jobs overseas, foreign wars demanded trillions in funding and thousands of lives, and those at home who suffered often turned to drugs, especially opioids, to ease the pain. An observant viewer will notice that these 3 issues fell hardest on one group of Americans, the Midwestern working class. Ignored and desperate for relief, they were the voters who rallied behind Trump's populist messaging and carried him to victory in 2016. They also disproportionately inhabit some of the larger swing states, giving them massive overrepresentation in presidential elections and thus unparalleled power to define national issues. But their sudden appearance on the national scene begs the question, why were these voters ignored for decades prior to Trump? Well, these voters got the short end of the stick and didn't have many options politically. They tended to be Democrats for their support of government assistance to the poor, yet even their staunchest defenders in D.C. were enthusiastic supporters of America's role as global police, because Reagan's vision dominated public opinion, and disagreement was punished at the polls. So, leaders upheld the order which a slim majority of voters and a large majority of donors wanted. This kind of leader is what I call a functional conservative, a conservative in the truest sense. Their governance is defined by minor tweaks. They fiddle with tax rates, they adjust drug laws, but any major reform is totally off the table. And, simply put, functional conservatives defined virtually all policy from 1980 to 2016. They weren't uninterested in helping these forgotten voters, they were just unwilling to sacrifice our empire for it. And politicians would have gotten their way if not for the one reason that these voters mattered more than any other. Because at this time, from 9/11 truthers to Occupy Wall Street, anti-establishment sentiments were bubbling up across the political spectrum. But, just like opponents of Reagan's vision years prior, these voters had no reliable representation in government. Predictably, this did little to slow their growth, and soon enough, candidates found themselves pandering to these dissatisfied voters. By 2016, Trump had fully embraced them. Trump's decision was the turning point that made dissatisfaction a force in its own right, not just one to be channeled by leaders, because the Midwestern working class became the nucleus for an emerging anti-establishment movement. Trump's 2016 victory, from this point of view, is a proof of concept, showing us that when the various anti-establishment interests cooperate, they have more than enough influence to change the direction of the country. But even though these beliefs are decisive to our politics, we still don't know what they actually are. We may be tempted to say that these voters are simply moderate voters, given how their beliefs are taken from the right and the left, and how they seem to vote for the winner of each election. But this is a misunderstanding, and the truth is hidden in plain sight. The youth vote, for example, swings more than any other group, and yet no matter who they support, they approve less and less of each subsequent president. Not what we would expect from moderate voters, but other than being dissatisfied with the status quo, the youth have little in common. On the left, countless young socialists fight to tax the rich and fund universal health care, and on the right, meanwhile, a combination of nationalist politics and anti-establishment sentiment dominates the discussion. But both of these movements aim to undermine the existing order, an order which they are convinced is working against them. At the same time, functional conservatives in both parties have been more united on a variety of issues, from Israel to military policy to trade. From this angle, it looks like our government isn't a two-party system at all, and the real divide is between pro- and anti-establishment forces. At this point, pundits who talk about conservative and liberal are just talking about factions within the two broader coalitions, which represent the true divide of the seventh party system, between populists and elitists. As a result, the culture war will be replaced by a class war. But how will the parties adapt to such a change? Well, we can see hints of future alignments in some recent events, even though the parties haven't quite caught up to the voters yet. For example, Trump ran as an anti-establishment populist in 2016, promising to gut the bureaucracy, drain the swamp, and, as we covered, created the modern populist movement. But today, the most populistic members of the government are Democrats who swear off corporate cash and routinely fight against the foreign wars. Meanwhile, the Republican Party is curiously lacking in populist rhetoric today. In other words, things change, and either party could reasonably absorb this populist wave of the future. If Democrats do so, they will effectively revive Obama's coalition of liberals, socialists, and the working class. In that case, the opposing elitist coalition, motivated by their belief in a system which brought them success, would migrate into the Republican Party's camp. On the other hand, if Republicans can maintain Trump's coalition, our political order would truly transform, with social conservatives, the working class, and capitalists united against economic conservatives, socialists, and liberals. But if the next battle will be against the system itself, would polarization get better or worse? Well, as my last video argues, the recent rise in intense polarization, shameless mudslinging, and even violence is, from a historical perspective, a return to normal. But if populism continues its rise, it will soon become a consensus, causing polarization to dramatically decrease. That's not to say that disagreements will disappear, or even that politics won't be as nasty as ever, only that battles will take place within a common framework. The forces of elitism, finding themselves at odds with the majority consensus, will consequently be forced to the political fringes. And while the patterns of the past can give great insight into the future, there are some things we just can't predict with similar accuracy. So instead of taking shots in the dark, we'll cover the things that will make the seventh party system totally unique. For one thing, Trump's ideological evolution is one of a kind among revolutionary leaders, and I'm not talking about how he used to be a Democrat. Andrew Jackson, for example, only resented East Coast elites more after being elected president, and Lincoln's disdain for slavery slowly hardened into an implacable hatred that was only satisfied with the Emancipation Proclamation. But Trump's populist rhetoric has grown noticeably softer in the last decade, on every issue from Epstein to the deep state to ending foreign wars. By now, his rhetoric is hardly different from other Republicans, even though his repetition of the same generic, conservative, often divisive rhetoric has significantly reduced his appeal. Of all the revolutionary leaders, Trump is the only one who later turned his back on the same ideas that made him popular. And that's not a moral judgment, it's an observation. All of the other 6 leaders who began new party systems became more emboldened with time, not less. But while conservatives are no doubt satisfied with this ideological evolution, Trump's voter base was largely comprised of these disillusioned voters, making the trend all the more unusual. And Trump's real reason for turning against populism may surprise you, because in the past, whether it was Washington's federalism, Lincoln's abolitionism, or Roosevelt's New Dealism, massive influence was achieved within a decade or so. And that's not to say they coasted to victory. These rising ideas were viciously resisted in every conceivable way before eventually overcoming their opposition. Just look at how violently the South reacted to Lincoln, or how the Whigs despised Jackson. With this in mind, it's clear that our politics is no more vitriolic than normal. The real difference is in who is being vitriolic, because in the time of Lincoln or Roosevelt or Jackson, willing and devoted allies of their ideas inhabited all parts of government, even on day one. But today there are few genuine populists in any corner of the government. And it makes sense. If you were elected to office, why would you rush to serve the voters? It's much more profitable and easy to just loot your office, take corporate support, and buy votes when you're up for re-election. Plus, even if you did want to make a difference, your donors and party bosses wouldn't be too happy about you breaking ranks. And this exact thinking is what causes so many leaders to oppose any effort at reform. And it shows that populism has unprecedented institutional opposition, whether it be from consciously corrupt politicians or relatively unimportant backbenchers. Communists during the Cold War and abolitionists in the antebellum South faced the same kind of coordinated, entrenched discrimination that true servants of the people now face. In reality, the next few decades are anyone's game, and it's going to take more than a single video to figure out where we're headed. So if you want to stay in the loop, be sure to subscribe. I release a new video every few weeks. If you want to support my work more directly, go to the Patreon in the description. I'll be posting more in-depth content there in the next few weeks, and it'd be great if you would support me there. Otherwise, I thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye!